Stacey is Stacey Mac Donald. She's a PhD student from Leiden University. She's born on Curacao, not even 30 years ago. She's really young, to Suriname parents. And she grew up in Curacao, came to study in the Netherlands, like so many of the Caribbean students who come here. And she studied child and family studies at Leiden University. And she now works on her PhD at the Royal Institute of Dutch, Caribbean and Asian Studies, also known as KITLV. And she works at KITLV as part of the NWO-funded research project Confronting Caribbean Challenges. Stacey's very interesting. She will explain about her research later, also because she combines her PhD with her own consultancy company, Mac and Field. And she will tell you more about this, but especially this combination of social studies and nature studies, which she specializes in, and her research and field skills makes her approach really interesting. So I will please invite Stacey Mac Donald for the coming 10 to 15 minutes. Ik ga even jouw PowerPoint pakken.
Ja.
En je kan gewoon hiermee door.
Top.
Ja,
Thank
ga je
you.
gang.
Yes. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that really nice introduction, Tanya. I think I can skip a lot of my first minute of presentation now. So I was asked by the NWO to share something about my experiences with doing research in the Dutch Caribbean. And as Tanya said, I am a PhD student at the Royal Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, also known as KITLV. And I started my PhD about little over 4 years ago now. And the topic of my presentation is called Less Talk, More Action, Multiple Hats, which is kind of becoming my philosophy, I think, in life by now. So, as Tanya said, I have Dutch Caribbean roots and I have a background in social and environmental psychology. I did indeed do child and family studies first, but then for my master I decided to take on a different route. And that was also because of my curiosity in, what motivates people to protect the environment. And I have a very big love for nature as well. So that was kind of what was driving my interest. And for my PhD research, I focus on nature conservation on the Caribbean Netherlands, so Bonaire, Saba, and Sint Eustatius. And what drove my initial question was the kind of controversial or, debated notion that kind of lives sometimes on the islands, is that only Dutch foreigners are concerned with what happens in the natural environment, which is, of course, not true, but that is kind of an idea that lives there. So, based on that curiosity, I wanted to know, who are these people who are concerned with the natural environment and what motivates them, but also specifically what do they run up against within the new constitutional reforms the islands were experiencing since 2010. So that's just really briefly general gist of my research. And to answer my questions, I used multiple disciplines, but also multiple methods. I used insights and theories from anthropology, psychology, by now also I think sociology, political sciences, I don't know, I think I'm doing a bit of everything, ecology maybe even. And I used multiple methods, so I did a series of interviews, I launched an online survey, I conducted several months of fieldwork on all three islands, and lastly I also did action research, so participatory action research on Bonaire. Now, to share a bit about my experiences. So what I noticed is that I had quite easy access when it came to, finding who the nature activists, so to say, are. They were not very difficult to locate. And they were also quite willing to talk to me. And I think that has to do with different reasons. Part because of my own Caribbean background, I think that really helped to gain access to the community, but also because I have a different approach. So that's what I'm going into a bit more now. So the first thing I noticed is that within nature-oriented research on the Caribbean, I was on the one hand one of many, but also one of few. So on the one hand, there's like a big stream of ecologists, biologists, marine scientists, a lot of more of the hard scientists, so to say, who are doing a lot of research on the Caribbean because of its pristine environment. Curious to see what's happening and what is the state of it and what do we need to do with it. So I was one of, that really big list of nature researchers. But on the other hand, I was also one of few, because I think I was maybe the only one, I'm not sure, not really, probably, but one of few who looked at this question or this area with a more social or psychological glasses, view, perspective, whatever. So that was something that came to my attention, and I also noticed that was quite appreciated, because a lot of people know that you have all these researchers who were then diving and doing experiments, and not everybody on the island really knew what to do with that information at the time. But all of a sudden, there was this girl asking them questions about, so why do you do this? Or why do you clean up your, the dumps on the beaches? And I think that was kind of fun for them to talk about and to share their motivation, but also I think a lot of frustrations, when dealing with these environmental issues. So another thing I learned was that not all conventional research methods really work on the islands. And I say that also being a bit critical about myself, that I may have been a bit naive at times when doing research in the Caribbean. Because, for example, I did an online survey, and that just didn't really deliver a lot of data. I think my survey was too long. My expectations of people being willing to sit behind a computer for half an hour answering boring questions, well, that's not really within the research culture on the islands, which is maybe more the case here, as people are maybe more inclined to protect their anonymity here. And it's a bit more common in the Netherlands, at least, to fill out online surveys, and not so much maybe on the islands. But other methods did work very well. For example, the interviews, but also the action research that I did. Doing something hands-on, something tangible, with felt results, and people were very willing to collaborate with me and share their experiences and their knowledge with me, and that through that form. So then a third thing, I also noticed a bit of a mismatch between island concerns and the interests of the government or scientific institutes. And I think that was also addressed a bit by Wim and Niels as well, saying, well, there's a need for, different type of research. The questions that we pose coming from the Netherlands aren't always the things that people on the island are concerned with or even interested in, or maybe they already have the answers to that questions because they've been faced with that problem for decades and they already know what needs to be done. So that was sometimes, especially in the field of nature, I feel it can be a bit difficult, because when you're dealing with societies that maybe experience more poverty, and then all of a sudden you're like, no, but we need to save this iguana. I'm looking at my colleague because that's what he does. But they're like, yeah, but come on, I just need food on the table. Why can't I eat this? Or, what are you dealing with? Or what are you going at? So that can be quite challenging, but not less important. And then finally, especially again in I think it's not unique for the nature research atmosphere, but in general, there are not a lot of people who are, really considered to be the experts or the biggest activists when it comes to certain topics. So what you notice is that when you are in a specific field, all the researchers are talking with the same people. If you look at the interview list at the end of a research report, it's always the same list of people on all the islands. And you can imagine that can result to a bit of research fatigue among those dear people who willingly share their free time and all their knowledge, and then see what is even, I think, more important, all this information, and then it ends up in a report and nobody does anything with it. And then, the next researcher comes and asks the same questions, and they're like, okay, never mind. Not only are there few who are sharing all their information, but also few people who are trying to do everything. So there's this big need on the islands. I feel that there is... it's time for less talk and more action. And then the question rises, but how and who is going to do this? Because we're only with, a handful of people willing and able and capable of doing this type of work, maybe. So expanding research in the Caribbean. So I kind of drew the conclusion that now with the NWO calls, the first call, the second call, we know more and more what needs to be done, but then the question remains who is going to do it. And I think I've said this to my supervisors from almost day one, like, I don't know if I'm really like a big scientist and if that's really the career path that I want to follow. I'm more, I like to do more applied things. I get more satisfaction from it. So we'll see. And then in my third year, I got a really cool opportunity to collaborate with the Worldwide Fund of the Netherlands, who is now also more active on the 3 islands. And the Worldwide Fund of the Netherlands was very much aware of fisheries management issues. And then they were like, well, it's also very much a social issue, so maybe we can ask someone to help us with this. So they approached me through the KITLV, and then based on the needs of the island, I focused my research on Bonaire. I helped establish a fisheries cooperative, which is now working directly with the local institutes to hopefully improve fisheries management efforts there. So that was when I got my first taste on how you can combine scientific research, because this was like bulk of rich data that I can now write several chapters on for my dissertation, but also kind of contributes directly to the island communities. So building on that, and then I have the question about who's going to fund this, but I think that is changing now with NWO, so that's really great. So kind of building on that, and again, having this kind of itch that I don't really want to do a lot with, only science, but also more applied stuff. As Tanya mentioned, I started up my company together with Tim van Wagensveld, who's sitting over there. He's a biologist, and we were on Statia, and then we were walking. We were like, there's so much we can do here, but there are so few people that can actually do it. Maybe if we join forces, we can help, conduct some projects. And then we got a really cool opportunity last year to manage a project called Reforestation, which is focusing on reforesting the island. And that was granted based on the damage that was caused by the hurricanes in 2017. So we collaborated with Stenapa, because Stenapa approached us, also knowing, it's really difficult. We don't have all this expertise or knowledge in-house to execute such a big project. So they approached us with a question, can you maybe help? And then we have now a 3-party, you could say, collaboration also with the local governmental department, LVV, Landbouw, Veeteelt and Visserij. And so that's really a cool project, really applied, really based on the needs of the islands. But at the same time, now we're thinking about ways on how we can maybe connect this project or give back to the scientific community, because doing this work and working on, within this field as well, it will undoubtedly result in a lot of data and a lot of knowledge, and there's a lot of room to do experiments on what is the best way to grow a forest, or which plant types would best work. So we're now thinking of ways, can we link these types of projects back to the scientific community as well? Then finally, to kind of summarize, are my experiences really that typical for Caribbean research? I would say yes, but also no. Because I feel like a lot of the things that I noticed are also very applicable in the Dutch scientific community, and maybe more specific for the Dutch Caribbean scientific community. But I think you see a lot of the same patterns reoccurring here. So on the one hand, as I mentioned, we're dealing with small communities and everybody knows everybody. But as I noticed here as well, all of a sudden, like all the scientists, especially in a specific field, like these are the people you're working with. And I think for the islands, you have 3 universities. If you need to collaborate with those universities, there aren't a lot of people there. So you get to know everybody quite quickly. So the bridge between the Netherlands and the Caribbean and working together often quickly results into everybody knowing everyone. And then there's also this idea of everybody's wearing multiple hats. So that's something that I experienced in my own work, especially if you go back to the islands, which is highly appreciated as well, just not to go there and then leave and never come back. Or, that's kind of a pet peeve, I think that's what it's called. But as soon as you start really implementing your work as well, or engaging in multiple projects, you notice that all of a sudden you're a consultant, you're a researcher, you're an advisor, you're a volunteer. You're involved with all these different organizations, all these different groups, but also different teams, which is again not typical for the islands itself, the people who live there, but also if you're doing work on the islands. And then finally, that your background, approach, and also your network matter. So as I mentioned, my own Caribbean background really helped me to gain access to the community, but I think there's also a lot to say for the approach you have. So if you're just going there, diving, looking at corals, and then leaving again, I mean, nobody's going to know you and know what you're doing. But if you're trying to involve the community, maybe educate people there as well about why it's relevant, why it's important, what they can do, have that bit of a more social approach, especially I think in more hard science or environmental sciences, that just leaves a bigger impact and is just better appreciated. And then lastly, your network matters. So only not on the islands. If you know everybody, it's great because then you have really cool access and you get a lot of information, but also here, I mean, knowing the people, the universities here who are involved, and the networks here, the organizations here, knowing how NWO works, how to get funding. And I think for me, again, personally, being from the islands, doing this work, it also built my own name, so to say, a bit within the research, but also governmental community here. By now, people know, some people know the work that I'm doing. And I also noticed that more often I'm becoming actively approached saying, hey, we know you did this work. Could you maybe also think along with this? So it's applicable on both sides. Now, very quick. I think my takeaway message or question or things to talk about really tie into what has been discussed earlier today with the opening of the grants as well. So we've been talking about research valorization for a while, and this has been repeated with the second NWO call as well, and I think there has been already several changes that have been taking place, even more so now. But I feel it's also time for maybe thinking about new age valorization, if that's a thing. So we've been presenting our work or organizing a symposium or kind of to give that knowledge back, and sometimes that's all we can do. So it's not to criticize fundamental research or if that's all you can do in that moment, but I think for other projects there's way more opportunity to really invest back into the islands or to build on local capacity, and I think that will also help create more continuity, which is also one of NWO's goals in terms of implementation. So can we continue to invest in and contribute to island capacity? Can we keep building local networks and infrastructure? So I think this new opportunity is really great. Maybe there are still some tweaks and things we need to think about with the actual implementation, but it opens up a lot of opportunities. So with that, I will leave it today.
Wow, well, we had this experience with Stacey when we made a film clip. She starts and woo, very, very interesting, very upbeat and enthusiastic presentation. Who has a question for Stacey or a remark or anything? Yes, Lisa.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. So your point of that there are quite a few researchers potentially kind of researching similar things. I was planning to mention that in my presentation too, so I don't need to do that. But I think that's the case, and it's probably going to get more. But how to coordinate and who should coordinate? What are your thoughts on that?
Projects? Research projects?
Right, to sort of ensure that you don't have this continual. Well, I mean, you call it research fatigue, which I guess corals could be research fatigued as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that we need to draw the conclusion that there needs to be, no involvement of the Netherlands, because also on the islands, especially when it comes to corals, let's just stick to corals, they know that there's this bulk of knowledge and expertise at Wageningen University. So of course they would like to collaborate with that. But maybe that the questions that are formulated are more, bottom up, so to say, or that projects are more derived from the curiosity that lives on the islands. And then you can kind of, build on a project jointly. And I think for the coordination of projects, it would be great if there's if it's possible to see if that could be on island, because the research is taking place on islands. But I think that because you're dealing with a small group again, people also tend to be quite realistic in that they might want to do it, but they don't have the time to take on another project or be another coordinator. So my advice is just to kind of open and address that, as transparent as possible, and see what the wishes are. And if they are willing for an external party to do the coordination, sure. And if not, then, look for a different approach.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Stacey. My name is Vashti. Thank you for your presentation. It was very inspirational. I am currently also a PhD student, and I was wondering because you said about the surveys that people aren't really open to that, and how would you advise for someone to get hard data on certain aspects of patients, for example?
Well, I don't think surveys can't work. For example, my colleague Wouter, who's sitting over there, he's a political scientist, and he did a really big survey on all 6 islands on the political regime and how people were experiencing that, and a long list of questions. But what he did, he was working with interviewers on island who were kind of conducting the surveys with the individual. So it's more labor intensive. It costs a little bit more money. It costs more time. But I think that works better because you can kind of have some accountability with the person that you're interviewing and helping them go through the questions. My experience was that didn't really always work well in my survey, because I noticed that people were very keen to elaborate every question. I had a lot of close-end questions. They're like, yes, but, and then all of a sudden 3 hours had passed. And we were through 10 questions. So I think be a bit realistic in amount of questions you ask at a time. Maybe, split it up. And do it more face-to-face. That could help.
Last question or remarks for Stacey? Anybody? No? Okay. Masha danki. Thank you, Stacey. Thank you. Yes.